Now we have hundreds of the body of children and women, the body in the road.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end.
Right now, all eyes are on Washington. But who's actually watching Europe at the moment?
And the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll in Gaza is now more than 60,000 people since the start of the war.
I'm Venetia Rainey, and this is Battle Lines. It's Monday, 1st of September, 2025. Welcome to autumn, everyone, and thanks for all your comments and emails about last Friday's episode. I know it's very controversial subject matter, but it's always really good to hear your thoughts and comments, so please do keep them coming. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at another devastating but much less covered conflict, Sudan. A quick recap. So, the country was plunged into a civil war in April 2023 after a vicious struggle for power breaks out between the official Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, and a powerful paramilitary group led by the army's deputy, known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Since then, more than 150,000 people have been killed, about 12 million have fled their homes, and a famine has been declared in parts of the country. The UN has described it as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. And this year, the war has deteriorated significantly. So, in March, the Sudanese Armed Forces recaptured the capital Khartoum, which had been controlled by RSF since the outbreak of the war. A big deal. Then, in May, the RSF fights back. It launches a major retaliatory drone attack on Port Sudan, which was the army's interim capital and also the main entry point for humanitarian aid. It has also stepped up its campaign to take control of the whole of Darfur. That's where fighting has been especially brutal. So in April, the RSF attacked the Zamzam displacement camp, leaving a trail of violence, rape and murder in their wake. Even children were not spared, according to reporting from the attack that has slowly been trickling out. The RSF has also stepped up its year-long siege on Fasher, which is a city that's become the last major foothold for Sudan's army in the region of Darfur. Over the weekend, fresh satellite photos showed that the RSF is building a wall around Fasher, apparently intended to trap around 300,000 people inside. That's according to Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab. All of this comes in the wake of the RSF being accused by the US of committing genocide through a campaign of violence against non-Arab Sudanese groups, sometimes called Black Africans. Now, it's incredibly hard to speak to anyone in Darfur right now due to poor communications and the ongoing fighting. But Mohammed Adam Hassan is a Darfurian, and he is in contact with lots of people still on the ground there. He's the head of the Darfur Network for Human Rights, and he's currently based in Kampala, Uganda, after he fled Darfur in 2023. Mohammed, welcome to Battle Lines. Can you start by telling us a bit about your story and why you left Sudan?
I left Sudan, as I tell you, I'm not safe because the war 2023, the war, this is the really affected us, even close our office as Darfur Network for Human Rights. We lost our staff in West Darfur and also in Nyala, also our office, they looted and destroyed. And also RSF, they targeting us because we see any organization documenting human rights, and in underground, they say this is the really against of the mandate. So that's the reason we are left our country. We came outside. Now also we are continuous. We're fighting of the freedom, protect of the civilian. This is the reason led me to come outside from Sudan. If inside I cannot do anything, I can also lose my life and lost my family. This is the system now in Sudan.
Darfur is obviously a place that our listeners will have heard of before. Since 2003, it's been host to a savage conflict between the indigenous non-Arab Muslim ethnic groups, the Fur, the Zaghawa and the Masalit. And then on the other side, the largely Arab Sudanese government and army, as well as the Janjaweed militia, which was an early form of the RSF. The president at the time, Omar al-Bashir, was accused by the International Criminal Court of overseeing a genocide against indigenous tribes. This tortured history for Darfur. Can you explain how this has affected what's happening in Darfur today?
Darfur, we have experience of the violations. This war is not started right now in 2023. The war started since 2003, in Darfur. And people of Darfur, as civilian of Darfur, they're suffering from the war and from the 20 years. After 20 years, the war repeated again. And also we have second genocide in West Darfur, Masali tribe. This is the war and also affected 100% of civilian from city, the flee out of the city in a camps. And this escalation, they also is systemic because special RSF right now is controlling the 90% of the regions Darfur. And right now also they established the new governments in yesterday is announced the delegation of the new government in Darfur region. Even Nyala is the state capital of the state of the Darfur region.
Okay, so RSF now controls 90% of Darfur and Fasher is the last remaining major holdout. What have people on the ground inside the city been telling you about what's happening there?
So every day we receive the people dying. Even right now, today, after 1 hour, the shelling since morning at 6 a.m. morning. They stopped just around 1 hour ago. Our monitoring on the ground said the RSF is still systemic attack the markets because we lost today give me the 4 person the killing by shelling and they wounded more than 18 person. This is right now I'm speaking before 1 hour with my monitoring underground.
So RSF shelling in Fasher has killed 4 people and wounded more than 18 just this morning. Is that right, in attacks on the city's markets?
Yes, this is people I speak of the underground from Fashir. They said even the RSF is yelling and also they not allowed any civilian to go outside. If they find you outside, they will kill you. And because the RSF seen any civilian right now in a Fashir, he belong to the south. So this is one of the problem. Right now we have more than 60,000 civilians right now in a Fashir, as they're not able to go outside Fashir because some of them they have disability, some of them they don't have the economic how to transfer from Fashir to Tawila. So and even they said they don't have any place there to go to sit because also they are civilian in a Tawila and whatever surrounding the area, no any surface of humanitarian aids because they seen. So they just accepted the situation and said let's sit inside the camps, Fasher and Abshok and within the city of Fasher. So RSF not stop the shelling and RSF they put Darfur region one of the strategic place, now they controlling West Darfur and Central Darfur and North Darfur and East Darfur. So this is area controlling only now the North Darfur is not controlling by SAF, and also the surrounding the city of Fashir are also controlling by RSF. And in Darfur we will be a separated country out of the big Sudan. And in Darfur, we have indigenous people, Indigenous people, we have the Four, we have Zakawa, we have Dajo. All those people is the African people, not Arab people.
Okay, so these indigenous people who, as you say, are of African descent, not Arab like most of Sudan, you're alluding there to these fears that the RSF will try to force Darfur to secede from Sudan and make its own state if it manages to capture Fasher. What would that mean for the indigenous non-Arab tribes there if Fasher fell and Darfur was ruled completely by the RSF?
Actually, our report, every day we're hearing non-Arab people, they don't have any voice. They don't have any right to speak because they arrest them, they abuse them, they adoption them, they killing them. We see in the war now, they go back to Darfur because Darfur have experience of the conflict, experience of human rights violation, experience of people suffering because, some camps established since 2003 and 4. So this camp now, for example, Zamzam camp. So now Zamzam camp also became now banning because we seen thousands of civilians across the Zamzam go to Tawila. Some of them died in the middle between Tawila and the Zamzam. Now we have hundreds of the body of children and women, the body in the road.
This is the Zamzam displacement camp, right, which the RSF attacked earlier this year and where they're reported to have slaughtered hundreds of women and children.
Another thing, war started 2023. Now we're in 2025, 2 years. So no food. So why? International community, we see in Palestine, they bring food by plane to fill food from up to come down to keep the civilian. Why international community silent? That is my question. Because even we think in international community, they don't like to civilian of Darfur region to be survived. We want to destroy us. We want to destroy them. So that is my question. Why? Because international community have power.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mohammed, why the international community isn't doing airdrops of aid, just like they're doing in Gaza, as you mentioned. I wanted to just end with one final question. As you're speaking to people on the ground in Darfur, I wondered if you could share the story of one person who has witnessed atrocities being committed by the RSF.
Yesterday, the family, women, they have 5 children. They hiding in Kandak. And in the evenings, they're going like to buy some supply food to the children. Even told me, I'm going to buy umbas.
Just to explain to listeners, umbas is this, it's like crushed peanut shells turned into paste, and it's normally used to feed animals.
You know, umbas, one of the main food now. Even this one, very expensive. Even he told me 1 kilo take like $10. 1 kilo of this umbas, you know. So she hiding from the conduct, you know, conduct like something to dig inside the inside the house and to hiding with the kids. She told me, I'm going to bring food for my kids. When I come back, I found all my kids died. So this is now the story is reality.
Sorry, so wait, how did her children die? They were killed by RSF shelling?
Yes, the shelling. So now they lost 5 of kids. And husband died last year. So this is the life reality now in a Fashir.
Mohammed Adam Hassan, head of the Darfur Network for Human Rights. Thank you very much for joining us on Battle Lines. Coming up after the break, why the UAE is accused of arming the RSF and how. Welcome back. Now, the Sudan war is a civil war, but there are many international players involved. The Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, they get backing and weapons from Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Iran. The RSF are widely reported to have one main backer, and that's the United Arab Emirates. Now, this is something that Abu Dhabi has consistently denied. But the UN, Amnesty and others have documented instances of weapons purchased by the UAE being used by the RSF. So, for example, the devastating RSF drone attack on Port Sudan earlier this year used long-range, sophisticated drones that are alleged to have come from the Emirates. The UAE denies that. Now, as mentioned, although both sides have committed awful atrocities in this war, it's the RSF that have been accused of genocide in Darfur. And the RSF leader, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti, he's been sanctioned. So the question of who is arming his group and how is extremely important. Amnesty has found evidence that advanced Chinese weapons bought by the UAE have ended up in the hands of the RSF. The Emirates denies that too. Brian Castner was the author of the Amnesty report and is the group's head of crisis research. He's also an expert in munitions and explosive ordnance disposal, having served 3 tours of duty working on EOD in Iraq. Brian, can you start by telling us a bit about the RSF? What's their background and what do we need to know about their leader, Hemeti?
So what we need to know about the Rapid Support Forces is that when the conflict reignited in 2023, it was really a civil war, so to speak, colloquially, because the RSF had become part of the government. You know, it started as the Janjaweed militias, which were independent raiding militias that had committed terrible crimes, war crimes in Darfur, starting more than 20 years ago. But over time, they had been gradually brought into the government. Hemeti, who was the leader of the RSF, there was a brief period of hope in the early 2020s that maybe with this coalition government and a power sharing agreement, that there was a peaceful way forward for Sudan. I've been at Amnesty long enough that I remember covering. We had done some work on protests that were held in Khartoum around what would the government look like, and, what power would average people in Sudan have in that government. And there was a brief period of hope. And that's why it's particularly discouraging that when what's normally called the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, the government armed forces, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, when this conflict resumed 2 years ago, it's not just been absolutely horrific for the people of Sudan and for civilians in Sudan, and the displacement crisis and the number of killed and the sexual violence, the number of crimes across the country is just absolutely immense and mind-boggling. Not only is that horrific in its own right, but it really is a dashing of a brief period of hope that we thought a couple of years ago.
What do we know about the UAE's support for the RSF? How far back does that relationship go?
So the United Arab Emirates have been supporting the RSF for a long time. They've been involved in various conflicts in the Horn of Africa for a long time. And in some ways, they hedge their bets in support at different groups at different times. But for the last several years, what we have been tracking is their support of the RSF.
What does each side get out of this partnership? I mean, obviously the RSF gets weapons, but what's the UAE getting?
The Emiratis are trying to purchase influence throughout the region, and that's true whether it's the Horn of Africa or whether it's Northern Africa. This is part of their overall policy in trying to, influence the future of various states. On the one hand, it's a very cynical partnership, and the people that always suffer in these conflicts, like I said, are the civilians in Sudan that are either being displaced, victims of sexual violence, or being killed directly in these attacks. The RSF has few international backers, and so having the Emiratis as a patron is extremely useful to them in that they have, like I said, there's not many states that are willing to provide them with weapons, especially sophisticated weapons. A lot of the average weapons, small arms that their fighters are using are battlefield capture from, in the course of the conflict. Amnesty have done a lot of work on various arms that have been sent into the country. There's Russian sniper rifles, and there's shotguns from Turkey, and there's a variety of small arms. But on the UAE side specifically, we've tracked a number of armored vehicles. The UAE produces a lot of armored vehicles, Nimr armored vehicles, which are made in collaboration with a country from Russia, Street Group armored vehicles. Street is actually a Canadian company that also manufactures in the UAE. So we've seen armored vehicles used by the RSF in Sudan generally, and then also in Darfur. But then not just armored vehicles and not just relatively low-tech small arms and rifles and such. We've seen these howitzers, 155 millimeter howitzers, which are Chinese howitzers that have been provided, and then very worryingly as well, drones, and not just Chinese drones, but also the ammunition that goes on them, these guided bombs. And we identified these Norinco guided bombs, GB-25s and 50s, that we've seen being used. This is the first battlefield identification of these weapons really anywhere in the world. And it's really interesting and concerning that it's not just any weapons that are being provided, but it is really new and sophisticated weapons that are being provided.
Norinco being the China North Industries Group Corporation Limited, this Chinese state-owned defense corporation. And in your reporting, you say that these weapons were almost certainly re-exported to Sudan by the UAE. What's the almost about? How did you track this and certify this to near certainty?
So the almost certainly comes because what we don't have, and what many organizations, whether it's journalists or research organizations like Amnesty, human rights organizations, what we don't have is, nobody has put an Apple AirTag on a crate of weapons from the UAE and tracked it, on a flight and landing in an airfield in Chad and then being driven across the border and whatever else. We don't have the absolute fidelity of every step in the process to be able to say this specific bomb was transported from Norinco in China to the UAE and then transported from the UAE to Chad, et cetera, et cetera. What we have is pieces of the puzzle, and we have a variety of compelling evidence that when you add it up, you get to that almost certainly. So what do we have? We have certain mortars, for instance, that were manufactured in Serbia and sent to the UAE and then discovered in Sudan. And they had the shipping labels from Serbia to the UAE still on the crates of these, particular mortars. If those didn't come from the UAE, then how did they get there? We have these howitzers, which are not the most brand new howitzers, but are still relatively rare. SIPRI, the Stockholm think tank and research group, only has one documented sale of these particular Chinese howitzers anywhere in the world. And that documented sale is China to the UAE. And then we've identified these howitzers in various places in Khartoum and around Sudan. We know that the Chinese sell drones to the UAE, Wing Loons and Faihong drones. We've seen these Wing Loons being used by the UAE throughout Africa. I've documented their use in Libya, for instance, in violation of the embargo. And then we have these GB-25s and 50s guided bombs that really only go to the drones. There's sophisticated avionics that are required to turn this weapon into a guided weapon. It's not just dropped randomly. It needs the certain umbilical to be able to get the weapon to operate correctly. And so it has to go on a Chinese drone, and we know the sales to the UAE. In each of these cases, most likely it is the UAE that is the provider. And then you add that up, and we have a pattern of behavior, now over many years, almost a decade at this point, of the UAE providing weapons, whether it's Sudan or Libya or other conflicts.
And what did the UAE say in response to this research?
Well, they've denied it with us the same way as they've denied with, say, UN bodies and with other reporting. Interestingly, when they replied, and they didn't reply directly to us, UAE government put out a tweet that disputed our findings on the howitzers and said that, that they're for sale generally, and other states could have bought them and provided them. Again, like I said, SIPRI only has one documented case. Sure, I suppose there could be others, but they didn't dispute the drones and the GB-50 guided bombs, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure why they disputed one of our findings and not the others. I think that there is another interesting component here in that China is a state party to the Arms Trade Treaty. The UAE is a signatory to the Arms Trade Treaty. China has been providing weapons that have been re-exported to conflicts in violation of the arms embargo, like I've said, not just in Sudan, but also in Libya. It's interesting that Norinco and China did not respond to our requests for information as well. And surely China knows that the UAE is sending these weapons on. And it's interesting that they either continue to provide from the history in Libya, they keep selling, and now these weapons are in Sudan. I feel like we don't know what the relationship there is and what China's approval in this is, or what their opinion of it is. It doesn't seem to have stopped sales, but that's another part of this, is that the UAE has proven itself to be an unreliable importer of weapons. And whether it is China or the United States or the UK or any other country that sells weapons to the UAE, they're not a responsible party. They pass on these weapons to armed groups that commit war crimes. There's a risk that further sales will go to groups that commit war crimes. The obligation, whether it's China, the US, the UK, or anyone else, the obligation is to stop selling weapons to the UAE until they stop this policy of diversion of these arms.
Have any British-made weapons been found in Sudan with the RSF?
We have not found British weapons specifically, no. We've found French weapons that go on certain armored vehicles. We have not found American weapons either. When it comes to the sophisticated weapons, it's mostly been Chinese.
And these sophisticated weapons, are they much more sophisticated than what the Sudanese armed forces have access to? Is it tipping the balance in favor of the RSF?
The Sudanese armed forces also have access to fighter jets and to a lot of other equipment that the RSF would not have access to. Our major concern is really not the weapons specifically, but how they are used. And the reason we were investigating these Chinese drones and these Chinese guided bombs provided to the RSF is because they're being used in airstrikes that are killing civilians. The case where we identified the GB-50 was in Al-Mahla on 9 March, where that particular strike killed 13 civilians and injured more.
Do we know if any of these weapons have been used in the brutal offensives that we've seen this year, for example, on El Fasher or Zamzam refugee camp?
We have not identified them specifically in the Zamzam refugee camp attack. We have identified the use of these howitzers generally across Darfur and I believe North Darfur, although I'd want to double check exactly the geographics. But yes, these howitzers have been used extensively in attacks in Darfur. And then like I said, this particular attack where we identified the Norinco bombs, it was this March, and it was part of, some of the worst fighting in Darfur right now.
The UAE obviously consistently denies supplying any sorts of arms to the RSF. Why is it proving so difficult to prove with complete certainty? I know you've mentioned that no one's ever put an Apple tracker on, for example, a weapons shipment. But am I right in thinking that some of the tracking on the planes taking deliveries between the UAE and Chad, this neighbouring country where a lot of the stuff goes into, that the trackers have been switched off mid-flight?
So we see them take off from the UAE, for example, or they go through a third country, and then we see them land, but we don't see exactly what happens in between, and we also don't know exactly what is on the aircraft. Getting that absolute 100% definitive can be challenging. I also, though, want to say that when it comes to the legal standard and when it comes to a policy standard, we're asking the wrong question. The question is not prove absolutely definitively that this particular weapon was transported on this plane, crossed the border in this place, and then was used in this particular attack that killed the civilian. That is not the standard. And if we're trying to prove that standard, then we're actually playing into the Emirati strategy when it comes to their denials. The standard, according to human rights law and according to the Arms Trade Treaty, that again, both China is a state party to and the UAE is signatories to, the standard in the Arms Trade Treaty is that the risk that the weapons will be used in human rights violations. It's the risk that they'll be used in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and it's risk in the future. And so the pattern that we've established, whether it is Emiratis providing Chinese drones in Libya that were used in the assault in Tripoli in 2019 that killed civilians, or the Emiratis most likely providing these weapons that were used in Darfur, or the Emiratis providing Emirati armored vehicles that are used in the fighting. There are so many pieces of evidence here that establish the risk that that's going to be used in the future. That's what we should be focusing on. It's what the UK government should be focusing on when making determinations about future arms sales and about their future policies. And I should say there is pressure that can be put on the Emiratis. They have changed behavior. A great example is the fact that in 2019, they transferred US Patriot missiles to Haftar and the Libyan National Army in the assault on Tripoli. This was reported. The Trump administration went back to the Emiratis and told them to stop and remove them, and they removed the Patriot missiles. So they are susceptible to diplomatic pressure when there is the will on the part of the US, Europe, China to use that pressure.
And what form do you think that pressure should be taking? Do you think there should be an embargo on arms sales to the UAE just generally?
Yes, no state should be selling arms to the Emiratis, period. Like, full stop, end of sentence. They should, to fulfill their human rights obligations, all sales should stop immediately until the Emiratis become responsible partners in what they do with those weapons that they purchase, because at the moment they are diverting them for use in Sudan, where there is these horrific crimes.
The UK hosted a Sudan peace conference, or I suppose war conference, earlier this year, and the UAE was invited. None of this stuff was really brought up or addressed. Was Amnesty disappointed by that? Did you think this was a missed opportunity?
It is a missed opportunity because in a lot of conflicts in the world, we struggle to know where to actually make an impact. What is the thing that is going to change the situation for civilians? What is going to change the situation for justice for war crimes? In this particular case, there is absolutely a clear diplomatic policy opportunity here to put pressure on the Emiratis, as they are allies, like you say, of whether it's Europe, China, or the United States. So there is great opportunity here in a way that there often isn't in other conflicts. So yes, a missed opportunity, but fortunately there's future sales on the books from a variety of countries. And so therefore there's also future opportunity to do it right.
And just finally, I know you've mentioned to me that you're doing some research into the assault on Zamzam refugee camp earlier this year. Is there anything that you can share with us from that at the moment?
Our concern right now primarily is the suffering of the internally displaced people. Zamzam was a place that over the years, even when a lot of other towns had been attacked, destroyed, burned, it was a place where civilians could retreat to and have some safety, which is why it was particularly awful that it was attacked earlier this year. One of the major issues is humanitarian access, enough food, enough medical supplies. And that is another case of political will with the international community, where they just have to care enough to want to provide sufficient supplies and really fully fund the humanitarian efforts there. When the U.S. cut a lot of USAID funding, one of the major losers in that round of cuts was Sudan. And the international community collectively needs to find the will to provide sufficient food and medical supplies. And like I said, all of that aid to people that in some cases are under siege. What we're looking at right now is what are the barriers to getting that humanitarian aid in, and hopefully we'll have more to say on that soon.
Great. Well, we'll definitely catch up with you to hear more about that further down the line. Brian Castner, Head of Crisis Research at Amnesty, thank you for joining us on Battle Lines.
Yes, thank you so much.
That's all for today's episode. We'll be back again on Friday. Until then, goodbye. Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles and hosted by me, Venetia Rainey, and Roland Oliphant. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. To stay on top of all of our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign up to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. You can get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. The producer is Peter Shevlin. The executive producer is Louisa Wells.